So he happens to be reading this literary journal from a girls' school. He's been meanwhile somewhat casting about for a story of his own to write without any success. I kept reading. The narrator The narrator is at a bus stop, heading home after a typing class at the Y. She's picked up a cigarette butt that someone else has dropped. She smokes the butt while she waits, even when it becomes apparent that another girl has caught her in the act and is completely grossed out. I don't really care, the narrator says, because I don't know her. If I knew her, or if she was a boy, that would be different. As she smokes, she thinks up a lie to scare up some cigarette money from her mother, another fee for supplies in the typing class. She rides the bus across the city, Columbus, and walks home through a neighborhood of brick apartment buildings. Her mother's apartment is on the 3rd floor. It's sweltering inside. The narrator's little sister is watching TV. Her mother's in her bedroom with a headache. She calls out to the narrator. Ruth, it turns out her name is. And Ruth puts some ice in a dish towel and carries it into the darkened room. She sits on the edge of the bed, holding the ice pack to her mother's forehead, and after making some tender inquiries, slips in the lie about the typing supplies. Her mother sighs and says, "Okay, of course, take what you need." She tells Ruth that 2 of her friends called, but asks her please not to make any plans as she feels really awful and needs help with Naomi. Ruth goes into the kitchen and looks at the notepad by the phone. The first message is from a girl she grew up with. It's the 2nd time she's called since Ruth got home for the summer, and though Ruth feels guilty for not calling her back, she knows she won't do it this time either. The other message is from Caroline Fallon, a classmate at the boarding school Ruth attends on scholarship. She dials the number immediately. The 2 girls make clever talk about how bored they are. Ruth calls her mother Maman and describes her indisposition in terms that make Caroline laugh. And Caroline asks if she'd like to go to a dance at the country club that night. When Ruth hesitates, she apologizes for the late notice and says, by way of explanation, they need girls. Okay, Ruth says, I need boys. There's just one thing Caroline says. It's so ridiculous, but anyway, can I give your name as Louis instead of Levine? Louis? You know, Louis, Logan, something like that. I'm sorry, Ruthie. Club rules. I see. It's disgusting. I probably shouldn't have called you. No, that's all right. That's fine. Tell them Windsor. Windsor? You are a stitch. I mean, Ruthie Windsor. Ruth Ann Windsor. Ruth and her mother argue over her plans for the night, and Ruth handles it so deftly that her mother gets out of bed to coax her back from desolation and take in the waist of a smart old evening gown of her own that Ruth's been coveting. When she leaves the apartment, she has to stop and catch her breath. She's so heady with the relief of escape, like getting out of Granny's hospital room. Then the dance, the convertibles in the parking lot, the Japanese lanterns along the path to the ballroom, the music, the boys. Ruth sees that the boys have noticed her, but the one who catches her notice happens also to be the boy Caroline has in her sights. His name is Coulson. He and his friend Gary sit down at Ruth and Caroline's table. They're both handsome, but Gary's sort of bland, and Coulson's broody and smart. Too smart, really, for Caroline. And just as Ruth feels his interest shift toward her, she senses a growing restlessness in Caroline, a watchful, formless unease. Something's wrong, and Caroline doesn't yet know what it is, but she'll know soon enough if things follow their present course and she will hate Ruth for it and drop her like a toad. Normally, that wouldn't bother her. Ruth likes to compete with other girls, and she fancies this Colson with his rumbly voice and hooded eyes. At any other time, she would encourage his attentions. But this isn't any other time. She's at the beginning of a long summer. One of the convertibles in the parking lot belongs to Caroline, and already Ruth has gotten used to being rescued from her hot apartment for breezy drives to movie theaters and the pool at Caroline's house. This is only the first of many dances at the club, and she wants to be invited to the rest. Caroline won't just drop her if she feels betrayed. She will make sure Colson knows that Ruth is here tonight under false pretenses, and exactly what those pretenses are. How interested will he be then? Lousy odds, Ruth thinks. She fastens her attention on Gary. He warms to it, and Colson withdraws moodily before resuming his languid banter with Caroline, who comes brightly to life. But Ruth is still aware of Colson and knows that he's aware of her. Something may yet come of it before this summer is over, something secret where Ruth can get her own back. Even now, the current between them is so obvious to her that she can hardly believe Caroline doesn't feel it. Ruth stands and takes Gary's hand to lead him toward the dance floor. Caroline smiles up at Ruth and lifts her glass. Good. She doesn't know. Everything's okay.